right, that is recording and action. Is that? Oh yeah, we got sound waves.
Perfect.
All right, and I'll come in and edit the beginning. So, PC, Pastor Chris Jung, welcome to the virtual couch.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I know this is a big deal. I have listeners that have been fans of yours since we did the episodes about a year ago.
Oh, good.
Right? We did one on marriage. We did one on parenting.
Right.
And we just finished one Sunday, and the topic was
Mental health.
mental health.
And navigating through some of the tough stuff with mental health.
Yeah, and so we were, how many minutes? We had 25 minutes, 30 minutes?
I think you and I did 30.
Okay, that's hard,
Yeah.
right?
To get in anything that can really affect change.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm glad we're getting to do a little follow-up.
Me too.
Hopefully
So
people
our
tune in.
goal tonight is we are going to basically go over the notes that we had down for that episode, and then I'm going to follow up with the episode itself as a bonus episode, or not the episode itself. I've said the word episode far too many times. The message that we
Right.
recorded at your church,
Yeah.
at Summit Church in Lincoln, California. mysummit.church, if anybody wants to go,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
And all of Pastor Chris's messages are there, and there are so many that are good. I mean, I've watched a lot of them, and I've learned about, you cover everything, topics about everything from money management, faith, again, parenting,
Right.
relationships, and I think that's what a lot of the listeners, virtual couch listeners, love, is that, you know, you're kind of keeping it real, as the kids say, but you're also a very Christ-centered person in church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I kind of figured out that if people can't make faith work inside the context of their marriage or their money or their parenting or their mental health,
Yeah.
then they start losing the need for it. And really, if you do look all throughout Scripture, you just see one context after the other where God is right in the middle of our messiness.
Uh-huh.
And so I think for too long, churches have avoided really messy topics. And so I like getting in there. I like that. That's sort of the way I live out my faith. So I hope other people live their faith that way.
Okay, I like that, and that's going to be perfect because I want to talk about what led you to. You've done a whole series in October, right? And before we do that, I want to deep dive into who is Pastor Chris. Cue the music.
We don't want to go that deep.
Yeah. Okay, but no. When did you start? Have you always been a pastor? Did you have a career before?
Yeah. No. So at a very early age, it was kind of funny because I found my relationship with Christ, and I became a Christ follower when I was about 12 years old, and I was going through this little heartbreak. These two girls in my neighborhood. Remember, we didn't have Facebook or social media or cell phones to connect with anyone. So you had to be friends with whoever was in the proximity of your house.
Right.
And these two girls that I've been friends with for a long time told me they didn't want to be my friend anymore. And that just crushed my little 11, 12-year-old heart. And I had gone home and prayed. I just started crying in my pillow, and I just prayed, God, if you're real, and if you are who the Bible says you are, then I want you to come into my life. And there wasn't anything really transformational in that moment. I didn't float off the bed. There wasn't no angelic visit.
Yeah.
But it really was a moment in which, in an emotional crisis, however big that can be for an 11 or 12-year-old, is when I sort of found my faith. So I started getting really connected and committed to church and just fell in love with it. My own youth pastor was extremely helpful in developing my character and helping me become a better, well-rounded person and grow in my faith. And so pretty early on, I really wanted to be that type of influencer in people's lives. So I started moving towards going to seminary, and I did as soon as I got out of high school.
Where'd you grow up, by the way?
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay. And Cardinal fan?
I am a Cardinal fan. Okay. And we've never been able to keep a football team long enough to be. I mean, we had the Rams for a while, but we were happy to give them back to California. I'm a Cardinals fan, and they almost made it to the World Series this year.
Yeah, exactly. So you were starting to head in that direction. Did you have anything else that you were interested in? That high school
marginally
timeframe?
and sporadically. I wanted to be a vet and maybe a psychologist. I always wanted to do something though that was helpful and help move things towards health. But I really ended up with a real deep passion for helping shape faith.
Okay.
And so I did that in 1992. I graduated from Bible college,
Oh,
and took my first youth pastor position, pastoring middle school all the way up through college age students.
where was that?
That was in South Sacramento.
Oh, so
And
is that what brought you out here?
what brought me out here was my internship.
Okay.
I interned for a really big church in Sacramento, and kind of came out because I was following a girl and romance.
Wait, and by the way, those two girls, when you prayed to know if God was there,
Yeah.
did you end up dating either one? Was the answer there?
I didn't. I had a crush on one of them.
Oh, okay.
I did. I had a deep crush, and that was probably more impacting on me than the other girl not wanting to be my friend.
Right. Okay.
As I lost all hope of ever getting a romantic relationship with this little other 12-year-old girl. So
Okay, but so you come out here, internship, but kind of.
yeah, I was chasing a girl out here,
Yeah.
and what was funny was I, in the first week of being here, met who would then become my wife. I met Lisa,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I tell this story and I say don't follow my lead on how to get married, but I saw Lisa and I said I'm going to marry her, and I had no game plan and no, there wasn't a revelation from God or anything. It was just I don't know. I'm just going to marry that girl, which was inconvenient because I was now dating this girl I chased out here, and Lisa had a boyfriend at the time, so I had no game plan.
Yeah.
But I fell in love with California, loved the culture, loved the environment of California, loved how California did church, and I just loved everything about California. So I went back, finished my senior year, and then just drove out here without a job,
Oh.
nowhere to stay. I kind of bummed a bedroom off of friends or slept on their couch, and ended up getting a youth pastor position in South Sacramento. I was there about 18 months. Lisa and I got married.
So how did when you went back for your senior year, was the girl still out here, the original girl?
She stayed, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she was at school with me originally and then came out here.
Oh, okay.
And so...
Did you break her heart or did she break your heart?
You know, it was complicated because a little of column A and a little column B.
Okay.
I was, again, don't follow my lead on this, but I was kind of I was hedging my bets and keeping things going with...
Does Lisa know this story, by the way?
She does know this story,
Okay, good.
and
All right.
it probably makes her mad every time she hears it. But yeah, Lisa was kind of, we were really into each other, and then she started kind of blowing me off. So I got scared. I thought, well, maybe this means less to her than it does to me. So then I started kind of moving back towards this other girl and kind of playing both sides of the fence. But at the end of the day, I said, man, I really am in love with this Lisa girl. And
Okay.
so I moved back out kind of to chase her a little bit and see if there was any chance of us getting together. And fortunately, it did work out. And her and I got married, and I made a massive move for us. I mean, she was youngest of 5 kids, wanted to really be near her family. And I moved her all the way back to Missouri to this little town called Lebanon. At the time, about 5,000 back then. And just really not California culture at all, and thousands of miles away from her parents and her siblings. And it was rough, but we were there for 4 years and fell in love with the community and fell in love with the people.
Well, and I don't know this, and for people that don't know how that works, how did you find that church?
It's funny because a friend of mine interviewed for that church. So it works differently in different denominations.
Okay.
Some denominations, all leadership is appointed by the denomination.
Okay.
I happen to kind of be in one where it works very much like any other job works, where you might hear about it through word of mouth. Back then, we didn't have big internet exposure. So you would kind of hear about it through district leadership or people who are more connected. And so I kind of found out I was looking for something new, and this friend of mine had interviewed there, and it didn't go that direction for them. But I kind of said, hey, I was there with my friend. I'm interested in coming there. So they brought us out and interviewed us, and
Wow.
and it was a good fit for us, and we a huge growing experience. But we moved all around over. I was in youth ministry for about 18, 19 years,
Wow.
and went from there to Orlando, Florida. From Orlando, Florida, back to Fair Oaks, California. From Fair Oaks, California to Surprise, Arizona, and then from Surprise, Arizona back here to California. And we've been here at Summit Church for 13 years, 10 of those being as the lead pastor.
Okay. And what was the large? I mean, was the one in Florida? Did you have an
Florida's
really large?
Yeah,
church?
that's a church of about 6,000 or 7,000, and then the one in Arizona is also about 6,000.
So you were youth minister there?
Yeah, in Florida, I was the junior high pastor, so associate youth ministry pastor, and then in Arizona, I was the lead youth pastor.
Okay. So how many youth would you work with in Arizona, for example?
Arizona, when I took over, there was just a little over 100. So that was one of the things, was they were bringing in new leadership to kind of help grow the youth ministry. And by the time I left, it was closer to about 300. I was only there a year.
Okay.
And in Florida, that was a much different thing. They currently they run over 1,500, almost 2,000 between middle school and middle school and college, and they have like 15 full-time staff on their youth ministry. They have a 1,500 seat sanctuary. They've got a Starbucks in there, a hamburger shop, an ice cream shop. So it's almost like a church within a church. They're really super successful at reaching their community.
Well, and do you feel like youth pastor, is that not just a full-time job, but is that a around-the-clock, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week kind of job?
Yeah, if you're not doing it right, it can be that.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the journeys I had to go on, was learning boundaries.
Gotcha.
Because, and you know this more than anybody, when you're sort of in a position to help people, you don't feel like help is confined.
It's hard.
To 9 to 5.
It really is.
You just go, if somebody needs me at 7 o'clock at night, I need to be available.
Yeah.
And I started reminding myself that, number one, it didn't happen overnight. Whatever crisis they're in didn't happen overnight, especially marriage situations. It took 15 years to kind of blow up their marriage. Yeah. And then when they finally decide, then all of a sudden they feel a sense of urgency, and they kind of project that urgency onto you.
Yeah, you need to get me in now.
Yeah,
we're ready.
Yeah,
so
we're finally ready.
Yeah, exactly.
After putting it off for 7 years, we're finally ready. And I had to just sort of learn how to do that. But honestly, in youth ministry, there's rhythms. Teenagers love to hang out, and we would have a house full of teenagers till 10, 11, midnight. Sometimes Lisa and I'd go to bed and we'd just say, lock the door, because they never wanted to leave. We were surrogate parents for a lot of them, and just sort of substitute parents. And so they loved being loved on, and they loved being appreciated and valued. And so they never wanted to leave. And we had to move some of the, for the sake of our own family, had to learn to set some of those boundaries.
So let's go to fast forward to Summit, because this is the thing where I think I was worried that we could talk all night,
Yeah.
right? So you get to Lincoln,
right,
and then you begin Summit. You said for 10 years as a lead pastor.
10, and then 3 as youth pastor.
Oh, okay. So that was 4. What's that journey been like?
I feel like the youth ministry part, those 3 years went really well for me, because it was like I could do it with my hands behind my back and blindfolded, because it was at the end of that spectrum where I had succeeded in youth ministry, and so I felt like I could just keep doing that on autopilot. But that was the problem, was I was on autopilot. I didn't have a real, I didn't have a grace for it anymore.
Okay.
I loved the students, but didn't love the youth ministry side of it, because I was older. I didn't have the energy or the enthusiasm to do all-nighters and to have kids in our home till midnight. And I kind of moved on into raising my own kids. And and so we were about to transition, and the lead pastor in this particular denomination we were in, the lead pastor was going to recommend me to be appointed as the lead pastor of that church. And he did that. In their transition, they appointed me, and I took over. Interestingly, I prayed that God would protect me from the position if it wasn't for me, because I knew what certain levels of leadership could do in your life. It could be as destructive as anything else. And my first year was brutal. It was really unhealthy for me. I was trying to do a lot of problem solving in my own power, my own strength. I felt very scrutinized and judged, and that was a lot of that I made up in my head.
Okay.
I felt like a denomination was watching me very closely. I felt like my own church was. I felt like maybe even thought like maybe Lisa was, and just wanting to be a good dad. My kids were, my staff. I had a staff working for me now, and so it was a really rough first year. And I used to go to these gatherings with other pastors, and they'd say, "How's it going?" And I'd say, "Oh, terrible." I said, I'm going to quit probably within the next 6 months.
Wow.
And they'd go, and that's not typical. You don't usually get that vulnerable with people you don't know that well. And I said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to somebody else, and I'm going to move on. And they were all really shocked and surprised, because, numerically we tend to be one of the larger churches in Lincoln. So it has the markings of looking like it's successful
Okay.
from the outside.
Yeah.
And here I felt like I was falling apart and I was going to just lose control of the whole thing.
Well, we talked before, even off mic, about imposter syndrome. I mean, do you feel like that was kicking in big time there?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I felt like the position was far bigger than me. I felt like either God had chosen wrongly or I had missed him and just didn't hear correctly. And
Okay.
I let my ego get in the way. There was a lot of, I felt no peace and no sense of confidence. And so I remember somebody coming up to me after a service and they said, hey, I don't know what you're doing up there, but it's not you and it's making us very uncomfortable.
Wow.
And I said, I'm not sure what you mean. And they said, so God picked you for this position and you haven't showed up since then. And I was like, it could have been very insulting to me, but it was this great sense of
real.
It was a great sense of relief for me that they saw it. And I had been kind of hiding that and maybe being in denial a little bit that I was pretending. I felt like I was trying to be the former pastor because I thought he was successful. He was loved.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just keep doing him and maybe they'll all keep loving me the same way.
Yeah.
And it just made everybody feel super awkward.
Mm-hmm.
And once I kind of started getting comfortable in my skin and accepting that I was in the position I was supposed to be, we started seeing a transition happen. The church started settling into their new identity and new leadership.
Okay.
And it's been hard. I won't say it hasn't been hard. Transitioning a church from the founding pastor for 14 years to new leadership is always difficult. But we feel super called to these people and we feel super committed and connected to them.
Well, you can feel that in your congregation. I want to say, so you're talking about being authentic, and I know that's a buzzword, especially in my world, but I feel like that you just nailed what that's like to not be authentic. And it's with good reason. You thought you were doing the right thing. You know, when I was recording my pornography recovery program, I remember there was a person there that he has his own program and it's very successful. And he was telling me, hey, here's how you need to deliver it. Here's what you need to do. Love the guy.
Right.
But the first 4 or 5 modules, I was talking like him. I was pausing like him. And I just thought, at some point I thought, no, I got to be me.
Yep.
And I can't to this day, I can't go watch any of that first part because it is not me.
Yeah, it's cringeworthy to look back on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because you like you said, you see the imposter sitting there.
Yes.
And but you also lack the. Sometimes we're not comfortable in our own skin, and you go, I like the way you look doing it better than the way I look doing it. So I'm gonna try and be you. And that was me. I had never led a church before. I had led a lot of ministries successfully, felt confident in all my skills and giftings, but man, when you put them in the new context of leading a whole church, I just crumbled under it.
But man, you have to find, I know this is, I mean, I worry so much about all the cliches I can say, but you have to find your voice, you have to find your identity. And I even feel like imposter syndrome hits me every week with my podcast even, and I feel like I will hear regularly, hey, you talk real fast, and sometimes I think, oh man, I shouldn't, but if I start slowing things down, I'm not going, I'm in my head.
Yeah.
So it's okay. And not and I feel bad even when I'll say, maybe I'm not for everybody.
Right.
And
well, it's like a golf swing. I've just taken up golf again and I'm terrible at it. And so when you're terrible at it, you tend to seek out opinions of how do I get better. And so I got a friend, a mutual friend of ours that I play with a lot.
Oh, if I know who it is, he's very good.
He is very good. He's pretty much a scratch golfer. But the thing I love about him is he won't say anything to me unless I ask him.
Okay.
And then when I ask him, he'll tell me something, and then all of a sudden my swing gets worse.
Okay.
And he'll say, "Okay, stop thinking about just do a little bit of what I said, and then stop thinking about it and get back into," because I start just getting up inside my head and I go, oh wait, your hips are in the wrong position. Now your club face is and I try to improve instantaneously.
Yes.
Instead of just introducing a little incremental change. And I kind of felt that way when I first started in that position was I wanted to be instantly successful, whatever that means.
Loved and adored by all.
Absolutely.
Touching and affecting people's lives.
And people were rejecting me. Now they said, it's not you.
Right.
It's not you that we're leaving. You're not the reason we're leaving. And I go, of course, because when the other pastor was here, you were staying.
You were here. Yeah.
And now you're leaving.
Yeah, it seems
so
like
that is me. And so I was facing rejection on a level that I hadn't before. And I think one of the things that I've come to appreciate is that because of my leadership, moving people on, whether voluntarily or whether I'm meant to do it or not, I'm doing a good thing for them and me.
Yeah.
I don't want people there who resist being led.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to be stalled in their own growth.
Yeah.
So it's good for them to move on. And it's good for our environment to not have people that are kind of digging their heels in. And our church has taken on a completely different personality. We're a younger church now than we were 10 years ago. And we have a lot of people who are there just exploring faith.
Okay.
And I'm not saying the other way was the wrong way. This is just a different culture and environment. And so we have a lot of people very young in their faith and exploring their faith and getting started in faith. And that was a big shift because the other pastor was a great discipler and great at taking people deeper in their relationship with God. And I feel like I'm good at getting them on the front porch and in the front door.
Okay.
And so it's taken on and I'm okay with that now.
Yeah. Well,
For years I've struggled, but I'm not.
And that's a nice segue into what we're talking about today, because I do feel like you're tackling topics immediately and you're not really afraid of, okay, this isn't what we normally talk about at church.
Right.
Do you hear negative feedback about that at times, or not?
I always tell my church that they're well behaved because they're either talking quietly about their complaints,
okay,
or they're just not complaining.
Yeah.
And either way, I'm happy with that.
Sure.
So I don't hear a ton of complaints about any of that. As a matter of fact, I hear, because of where people are at in their journey of faith, they're young in it, and so their lives are very topical.
Mm-hmm.
They're very driven by marriage and difficulties and finances, and so to walk in and them go, wow, you mean there's something in Scripture that can help me walk through this? There's something outside of my own ability or power. There's something that, because people kind of go all over for answers. They watch a lot of TV. They go on to, I told you recently that I bought a little fishing boat.
Yes.
And I'm trying to work on it myself because they can be expensive.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing there's a ton of people out there who have videos on how to work on the engine. And I'm also noticing there's a lot of people who are unqualified to teach you how to work on an engine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I run into that as a therapist. I
Sure.
mean, bless people's hearts, but I will listen to podcasts where people are just given some nice pop psychology advice.
Yep.
And not realizing, again, I say bless their hearts, but if somebody is turning to that person for an answer and the answer is not necessarily going to strengthen them or their marriage or their parenting style, that can be a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think in the same way we sort of get our medical information from WebMD, or we can Google.
Dr. Google, I hear it often.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We give ourselves a degree in medicine and psychology because information is so accessible to us. But the problem is very little of that's vetted, and a lot of it's conflicting.
Well, and then there's the confirmation bias alone. I love when somebody comes into me and says, "Am I borderline personality disorder?"
Right.
And I'm like, well, if you're asking, first of all, probably not.
Right.
Or but they Googled and there's some of these symptoms. But then you can make those symptoms work. Right?
Yeah.
So all right. So the topic of mental health. What led you to that? I saw you at a football game, and then you came over and I know I was so grateful that you just. There had been a lot going on in the world, in the faith community, I guess. Yeah. Okay.
So about a year ago, in August of 18, a young pastor, he's about 30 years old, and he was, again, by sort of standards that we sometimes use even in the church world for success, large congregation, influential, kind of a rising star, very, very young to have that level of success. And he ends up taking his life at, I think he was about 30 years old.
Wow.
And then almost a year later, September 9th of this year, a pastor named Jared Wilson, who had pastored his own church, had been an associate pastor at a very, very well-known church in Southern California, very large church, and had actually in 2016 started his own ministry to sort of help people in the faith community kind of lift them up who had been struggling with depression and suicidal thoughts. So he was very vocal, very open about his own battle with depression and battle with suicidal thinking. he took his life, and it really shook the faith community. And it struck a nerve with me because I thought, if I'm paying attention to it, and I'm seeing these articles, and I'm watching the news story, then all the people that I'm leading are also encountering those same things, and it's probably striking a nerve with them as well. And I started thinking, probably one of the most isolating and alienating seasons of your life was when you were experiencing emotional unhealthiness and pain and crisis and felt like you couldn't turn to anyone.
Right.
And you might be the right person to lead these people in a conversation about faith and how it connects and relates to mental health. And we usually always believe that faith and mental health are going to be synonymous with mental happiness and emotional joy, and that if you are a person of faith, then you are always feeling good. And so a lot of people carry around a ton of guilt because they're a person of faith and still struggle emotionally.
So then they feel like I've heard every version of that story. Their brain tries to tell them of that they must be bad, that God maybe has abandoned them, or what's wrong with them because they keep trying to pray or read scripture or be involved, and then they aren't happy. So something must be wrong with them.
Well, and back in the day, and thankfully the culture in church is moving, but back in the day, if you were sick physically, you had cancer or the flu or a herniated disc, any physical ailment, nobody thought twice about you going to a doctor, getting medical help, taking medicine, getting physical therapy, wearing a cast, whatever it was. But if you had a mental or emotional illness, and I'm using that in a really general wide term, if you had a mental illness, you just needed to pray more. You needed to believe God more. You needed to. And so people felt really trapped. They didn't feel like they could go to anyone for help. So marriages continued to suffer, and people began to fall apart emotionally because their faith was telling them, their church culture was telling them, just pray. You're just not, you're not believing hard enough. And God can heal you of this. And it was really a terrible double standard. So I'm glad the culture's shifting, but I don't think it's there yet.
Oh, no. I mean, and you're right. It is shifting. I'm grateful for that as well. But I routinely do a lot of Christian counseling, and I can't tell you how many times people come in and I feel like they're just waiting for me to tell them, have you thought about praying more? Or have you thought about reading more scripture? Or here's a talk from a church leader. And that's the problem, is they've been doing those things. And if they aren't working, again, they go back to the what's wrong with me story.
Absolutely. You're just not good enough at believing God for the right things.
And then the part that breaks my heart almost the most is then when they start to feel like, well, then God must have abandoned me, or God doesn't love me. And where I'm feeling it's the exact opposite. I guarantee you that.
Because people have even interpreted sickness as a punishment from God, as a consequence of their sin. And I think we're broken as people, emotionally, physically, spiritually, because sin is a contaminant since the beginning that has infiltrated it. But I absolutely don't believe that God imposes sickness, mental or physical, on people as a payback, as a hammer over the head for your. And so people do feel distanced from God and isolated from their own faith community. Because if the conversation's not happening from, I'll use the old term, the pulpit, then it can't happen in the pew. And two very old churchy terms. But if you don't give them permission publicly to talk about mental health and emotional health on a very open, candid, and I even try, I was talking to one of my staff today, and she was wanting to really grow in her communication skills. And I said, if you'll take note of what I do, I said, I'm routinely self-effacing. I'm routinely joking about myself and trying to expose my humanity to people, because I said, nothing helps us connect with people more than I struggle too.
Absolutely.
And so I joke about me getting speeding tickets, or I joke about me kind of losing my cool at the bank because, they gave me the wrong change. Or I try to really help them understand that every single one of us, because one of the big problems with faith leaders and church leadership is we feel like if we tell people we struggle, people won't follow us anymore. People won't listen to what we have to say anymore. I found in my story that the more I do that, the more I get people who say, thank you for being real.
Absolutely.
Thank you for letting me know you struggle too. It helps me feel okay in my struggle. Not permission to keep struggling, but it helps me understand.
Well, you're relatable, then you have empathy. I mean, I go back to, and we've been wanting to have a podcast episode for a long time. We were going to come on and talk about ADD back in the day, right? And I mean, that alone, I did a 2-part series on my ADD, and that I've received more feedback from that than any episodes.
Really?
Other than with the sex therapist. But
right.
other than that one, I mean, it's like, it's true. It's a true story.
That's always a good one.
I know, right?
The PG-13
one. Totally. But, and I didn't mean that to sound like it was, but I mean, it's true. Right. She's a wonderful person.
Sure.
But those 2 episodes, and it was people feeling like, okay, I was being vulnerable. Now, I received some feedback of saying, oh, you talked about medication too much, or you did whatever, but it goes back to that being authentic. Right. Of, well, I feel better talking about authentically, and this is who I am. And so if somebody does have a challenge with that, bless their heart.
Yeah.
They can. There's like 780,000 podcasts. And
they can move on to the one that talks about the things they like to hear.
Exactly, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I call sometimes if I have a difficult conversation with our congregation, and there's somebody in there who sort of rejects that or doesn't like, we're pretty casual church too. So I would say
there's a funny story. Go find the YouTube video of our message on Sunday.
Yeah.
And we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. Yeah. So I dress down because even in that I want to communicate. We want you to come.
Which I love that. And you made jokes about it even.
Yeah. So I had this years ago. I had this lady that would bring her mother, and her mother was very traditional, and her mom would sit in the front row and just scowl at me. I mean, scowl. I would tell a joke or I'd say something funny, and everybody'd be laughing. And this lady would have her arms folded, and she would scowl. And so I asked the daughter. I said, "Hey, I don't think your mom likes me." And she says, "Well, she doesn't like that you wear jeans and don't wear a tie and that you joke too much." And she had a whole list.
Yeah.
And so I know the mom had been communicating with her a lot. But when I say, and then sometimes Lisa, my wife, I was telling you this before we started doing this tonight, sometimes Lisa will tell me, "Honey, I don't know if I would tell that joke again." But I call those herd thinning moments.
Okay.
Sometimes it's okay to thin the herd. Sometimes if people are coming for a reason and the reason maybe isn't balanced and healthy and they're objective in being a part of that faith community, then maybe it's time for them to kind of move on. Because I really want it to be, I don't want our community of people feeling like they have to do the imposter thing.
Right.
I want them coming. I have a lot of people who will be talking and they'll say, they call me PC, Pastor Chris. Yeah. They'll say, "PC, I'll tell you, I had a blankety blank week," and they'll just, they kind of lay out the profanity, and I'm always a little bit taken back, but always a little bit grateful that they feel that level of familiarity and safety with me, that in their struggle, I'd like to see them work that out of their conversations.
Sure. Yeah.
But also I think this is who we're called to serve and connect with, is people that are right in the middle of it. And when they're describing their week, that's the word they thought of. Yeah. And if they were in a kind of a more pious, formal environment, they might have a real difficult time feeling that level of authenticity. So,
well, and so many thoughts with that. One is that it does go to the people need to be heard in order to even heal or move forward or change. Or so the person, if you come in and just say, "Hey, I'd prefer you not use that language," person feels immediate judgment. Now they're going to be a bit defensive, and that's not the community that you're trying to build.
And judged, which is the stereotypical persona of church people to begin with. They're a bunch of judgmental, condemning. We've really tried to lift that stigma. Yeah. And just through simple, small things like that, just being human to people.
Yeah. No, I feel like I've got a huge message when I deal a lot with pornography addiction, compulsive sexual behavior. And one of my biggest things I love to preach is taking the shame out of that. Yeah. Because that shame, but there are religious leaders that I run into that say, no, they need to feel bad. Mm-hmm. Well, it's like, guess what? They've been feeling bad for a long time, and that hasn't worked.
How's that been working for them?
Right. Yeah. So they need to feel strength, positive. They need, something to kind of work from, a place of strength. Yeah. 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 I want to say something to you, since we kind of were talking about suicide. One of the things that I really appreciated when I saw you at the football game, and you had asked me if I would be interested in coming on, and I couldn't wait, and you wanted to tackle a topic like suicide,
Right.
because there's that. It's what am I saying? It's pop psychology. It's not a real message where you say that if you talk about suicide, it increases suicide.
Right. Like you're planting a thought
Absolutely.
with them. Like they had never considered it. You
Yeah.
bring it up and all of a sudden they've got a new idea.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know I could kill myself.
Right. I mean, if somebody has done that, they've been thinking about that for a long, long time.
Absolutely.
They have. And you know what? Actually, maybe this will be a nice tease is the right word, but
Right.
I think I even didn't finish when I was talking about the word episode at the beginning of this episode. But after our conversation, I'm going to run the message that we did on Sunday, and I go a lot deeper into a couple of stories of people that have survived suicide.
Yeah.
And as well as there's some amazing. I will read this one. There's an article called "Where Are They Now? The Fate of Suicide Attempt Survivors." And this one was one in particular, 515 people who had intended to jump from the Golden Gate Bridge who were stopped. Only 7% went on to actually kill themselves at some point later in life. And so, it's this testament to the fact that suicidal crisis is very often temporary. It's a temporary thing. And if that is, if somebody just says, okay, well, maybe that's, I don't know, San Francisco or whatever it is, there's 177 other studies worldwide that a couple of doctors have done a review on and found those same findings.
Right.
So it's not only, we need to be educated about talking about it, and it not only it makes it less of an issue.
Well, and again, in the faith community, you can almost talk about depression or mental health as long as you don't cross the line and begin to talk about suicide, because suicide is really has some we'll call them eternal implications. We don't know. Well, some people think they know what to do with suicide. If somebody who's a person of faith and in my context, a follower of Christ, if they commit suicide, we don't know what to do with them eternally. And so I've not only attended a lot of those funerals where somebody's taken their life, but a few years back, and I think we talked about this, and you knew this person, a person in our community and actually attended our church had committed suicide, and I was personally really shook up by it. And I was asked to do the funeral, and it was incredibly difficult for me, because I know that people came expecting me
to rule, to judge,
to resolve that for them, to put this person in a place in eternity so that they could all walk out feeling a way. And some people want me or any other church leader or person of faith to sort of assign them to their eternal destination. They're either in heaven or hell. And they want that because, again, the confirmation bias, it goes, good, you believe what I believe. Because if we put them in hell, maybe everybody will be afraid enough that they won't do it. And if we put them in heaven, we all get to feel okay. And sometimes people who are struggling with that want to hear that it all works out in the end. And so it's a really messy thing for a pastor, a church leader, to try to address that. And so I had to walk and I don't even know that I did it that well. One thing I do know was she was a person of genuine faith. I used to sit down with her frequently, and she'd struggle emotionally and struggle spiritually and really wanted to know she was right with God. So I never for 1 minute doubted her authenticity, her faith, her zealousness for Christ. Any of that. She was so passionate about wanting to please God with her life. And I never for a moment doubted the trueness of her struggle with depression. I mean, a real struggle with depression. For me, it was the first time I think I had encountered somebody who was equally full of faith and equally full of pain and hurt, and couldn't match those two worlds and couldn't make one impact the other to the degree. The faith didn't save her from the suicide.
Right. Couldn't just pray it away.
No. And so that's one of the reasons I think so many people have a difficult time is we would rather not talk about it, because we don't want to give anyone the impression, hey, you know what, go ahead, because it ends all pain and you get to be with Jesus. And we don't want to sort of preach someone into hell, because we really don't have any certainty that that's what happens either. And so it's a really messy thing. And I guess I'd rather come from the perspective of, how about we just help people never get there? How about we really work hard to open communication and love on each other and connect with each other? And figure out ways to put up the guardrails that just keep us all
Right.
from.
I mean, like that article, 515 people stopped, only 7% go on. I
Yep.
mean, that's phenomenal numbers. I do have to say, as a therapist, take the, not as not a pastor or
Right.
anything. I feel like one of the biggest epiphanies I've had over 15 years of counseling now is just that concept of how those everyone's kind of private experiences are, all of their nature, nurture, DNA, abandonment, rejection, all of those things that I call it lowers their emotional baseline. And so and I've worked with a lot of people that have been suicidal, they get into really dark places. And when I have been in a room with somebody like that, I mean, that's the stuff that is just so, talk about breaking my heart, my empathy meter on overload, sometimes not knowing what to do.
Right.
And it's because when you see somebody there, I know that they are not making decisions that they would make when the sun is shining and when things are going better in their life.
Right.
And so for me personally, I feel like that's almost like the epitome of showing how bad depression or these things can be in someone's life, to put them in a spot where that does feel like the option.
Yeah, I say this, and it's terrible grammar, but it helps communicate the point. I always say sick people think sickly.
Yeah.
So Lisa, my wife, just had terrible sickness. We don't even know what it was. Bacterial infection is what the doctor said. But she was so sick. I'd never seen her this sick in 26 years. And she couldn't carry on a conversation. She couldn't engage with the kids. She couldn't eat. She couldn't drink. She couldn't take any more medication. And everything about her was impacted by her sickness. And we're empathetic and sympathetic when we see that in somebody who's physically sick.
Right. Right.
Then somebody experiences that same level of sickness mentally and emotionally, and somehow, because we don't personally identify with that, it's hard to be empathetic or sympathetic. And I'm including myself in the wheeze of how people typically react. It's, man, you just need to get out and go for a run or go.
And they're in a spot where that doesn't make any sense. Couldn't do it.
They couldn't even imagine.
No, they just need to be heard. They need to be acknowledged. They need to know that you care about them. You point them to help, point them to community, point them to family, but just hear them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I never grew tired of Lisa being sick to the degree that I went, you know what? You got to stop.
Right.
But for good grief, Lisa, it's been 7 days. I mean, how long are you gonna do this? I can't keep cleaning up everything around the house. I can't keep taking care of you. I kept pointing her to, honey, it's going to get better, and we're going to keep doing whatever and it did. It kept getting worse, and finally, I just said, you know what? You need to go to the ER. And we got her some medical help, and she was dehydrated, and they flooded her with antibiotics, and they gave her all the right things, and it kick-started her recovery. And days later, she was much better. And I think people struggling, especially at the level where suicide becomes a viable option, they do need someone who doesn't abandon them, who stays close to them, who says, we're going to keep doing whatever it takes.
Yeah.
It's what I said at this lady's funeral. I said, I'm mad. And I used her name. I said, I'm mad at her because she didn't invite me in to fight harder with her. Yeah. I'm mad at her because she had so many people around her that would have continued to fight with her and continued to stick by her side and loved her and wouldn't have given up on her. And I felt that, and I still do feel like that when people reach that place, boy, they've just got to feel like there's enough support around them that no matter how long they have to hang out in this space, somebody's going to stay with them until they get the help that they need.
Absolutely. And you're right. And a lot of times people haven't necessarily taken medication, or they feel like they aren't worth reaching out to somebody. Or, I've worked with a handful of teenagers that get to that point. And that's the part where I say, hey, we need to talk to your parents. I mean, your parents would rather, have you go to Disneyland every day and pay you an allowance and give you a monster truck than, and I'm not trying to say they should use that for manipulation. Right. But then, I mean, right now, they want to hear anything that you have to say. Because the last thing they want to do is feel like, why didn't he reach out? Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've been around here long enough that in our community, Lincoln, there was like a rash of teenage suicides, and it really became startling. And I think that it helped maybe alert parents to how easy it is for a student, and I think this is the same truth for adults, how easy it is for somebody to put on, because this Jared Wilson, who the pastor earlier this year who took his own life, he had just posted on Twitter kind of an inspiring thing about, I mean, just that day said, you know, Jesus doesn't abandon, he always gives hope, and he doesn't leave us behind. And there was a video of him posted playing with his kids that very day. You wouldn't on the outside ever speculate that he was in that crisis, and I would have to assume, and I'm only speculating now, but I would have to assume that he had already planned that out, and he was already, but he was closing up things in his life and kind of putting on that persona for everyone around him, and it's tough. I think it's a wake-up call that we've got to push harder and ask uncomfortable questions, have uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, because I would rather have those than not. I would rather have my child say, Dad, like that, are you serious? You know, then well, great, you know, good talk. Rather than not talk. At all, right? You know, I did pull up on there's the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and just, I don't know, maybe that I would encourage people to go there, afsp.org, and you know, warning signs. I mean, there are of course people talking about killing themselves, but I do say, the therapist in me always says, during an assessment, you ask, hey, have you ever had any suicidal thoughts? And if somebody says no, I feel like, okay, no, I mean, we all kind of do at times. It's okay. It's do you have a suicidal ideation? Do you have a plan? Do you have you know, that's when we want to take more, be a little more aware. But people that talk about feeling hopeless, you know, people that really, one that I hear often is people that feel like they're a burden to others. And I think that's a big warning sign, feeling trapped, or, you know, and there are sleeping too much, sleeping too little. This is one that I found kind of interesting, the giving away prized possessions. I mean, that was a sign with someone that I was working with, and I did kind of bring some awareness to it. I mean, they were giving away a lot of things, and a big one too is just that withdrawal from activities, and I feel like that's the one where it's literally a kind of a plea for help, because it's people continually saying, I don't think so, or I'm not going to do that. And I think that that's one of those things where we talked about this in the message. If you think about someone, if you recognize you haven't seen somebody around for a while, and you think about, I don't know, I wonder where they're up to, I wonder what they're up to, where are they? Reach out. Right? Use that as a prompting from the Holy Spirit, and just because people want to hear.
And there was one time, I mean, just one time in my life, and this is what made all of this far easier for me to engage in, and this was about 13 years ago, and I was in a season of transition. We had left Arizona, and I came back, and I wasn't certain about whether I wanted to be in ministry anymore. I was in so I felt like I was losing my identity as a leader. I could not land a job to save my life. I mean, I applied at a bank, I mean, the 18-year-old high school seniors get jobs at banks all the time with zero skill and undeveloped or underdeveloped interpersonal skills. And here I was, somebody who was a professional communicator. I could not land a job at a bank. I couldn't land a job at this radio station nearby, watching a screen for $8.25 an hour. And I literally thought, you're used up. There's nothing you are valuable enough to do. And I had gone months without working, and I laid in bed, and I didn't feel like I had any motivation or reason to get out of bed. I didn't feel like my family could see value in me, because if I couldn't be a providing husband and a supportive father, I had to say no to my kids. Anything they wanted, I had to say no. We couldn't go on vacation, and we'd always been able to go on vacation. And I got to the point where what was previously an absurd thought, the idea of me not being here anymore, now I thought, what are you here for? Like, if you've run out of things that you're good for. And I really got inside that headspace, and I don't think I came to the point where there was a plan, or the idea being introduced to me was no longer absurd. It sort of made sense. And I thought, boy, if you just had more life insurance. And I started having those kind of thoughts. Thankfully, I did have people in my life who were able to plant thoughts into me like, I know this is crushing and smothering right now. I have to tell you, I've been there, and I promise you, you have to believe me, it does get better. This won't be your story 6 months from now. And because they were people I trusted, and because they were people I believed had been to that level of disparity, I believed that enough that I had something to hold on to.
Sure.
And that's why I'm convinced that being a part of a faith community, getting into connected relationships, intimate relationships that allow you that level of vulnerability. So I was reading a study, and this is really hard to pin down. I was kind of surprised by how little statistical information there is about this. But there seems to be every indication. It was a university, and I can maybe give that for you if you want to add it in later. But it seemed like it had been vetted as a credible source, that with the exception of Eastern Asia, religion, being a part of a religious community, reduces the risk of suicide because there is interpersonal connection, and there's the level of encouragement and level of, and I mean this in the best way, accountability and connectedness that you don't experience outside of the community. And because of Eastern Asian religions tend to be very individualistic, and you tend to only engage when you need something, and it's a very, I need to do well on a test, I need a car, I need a job. You're not connecting in relationships. That's not how Eastern religion typically works. But Latin America, they cited in America that that because of the way we do church together, there seems to be correlation between a reduced amount of suicide within those contexts. Actually, it increases in Asia because they don't engage in religion until they are in the middle of crisis. Versus in Latin America and North America, you're already there, and then when you begin crisis, you have this network of relationships.
Right, I'm familiar with that. There's a couple of good studies on that, and because it not only is this is where I always go with that too. There's the accountability, the community, the connection, but also the service aspect as well.
Yep.
And I feel like that from somebody's sick in your congregation, you're taking them meals, you're checking on them, that sort of thing. And I feel like it also provides a framework for if you are feeling down. I mean, I often tell people, if there's anything you can do, it's go serve someone else. Just get outside of yourself.
Yep.
And I think so that's a
and it affirms your value, that you've got the potential and capacity to do something good. In that headspace, I didn't want to help anyone because I thought I didn't have the worth to do it. Had I been put in that position or taken somebody up on an offer to be, because at that time I did have church leadership reaching out to me.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, saying, hey, would you help lead up the ushers, and when you help do this? And I just thought, no, I don't want to do any of that. Because I felt hypocritical. I felt like my faith had failed me. God and I were in the middle of a big wrestling match. Okay. And I just didn't know
how was that working? Were you doing all right wrestling him?
Well, I tell this story, and I'm not sure how appropriate of a story it is, but when we first moved back to California, we went and bought 2 little rat terriers, most adorable little puppies, and they're 2 girls. And when I would come home, they would both roll over immediately on their back, and they would pee a little. Oh. And it was their act of submission to me. Like, you're the alpha male, we recognize you. They weren't scared of me, I never yelled at them, but it was we're submitted. And I talk about that season in my life, how I would stand out on the driveway and shake my fist at God and tell him, when I'm out on the streets and I don't have any money and my family is hungry and we're living in a cardboard box, I'm going to tell everybody it was you. And I was really, really angry. And things just kept getting worse until I really felt like I broke. And I recognized that it wasn't God causing all of this, that life happens. Yeah. Sometimes tough circumstances happen. Absolutely. And I had walked away from the position in Arizona. It's not like I got fired so I had made some choices. I chose to come back to this area. And I always tell people, I feel like I rolled over and just peed a little. And I just said to God, you win. Yeah. You're in charge. I surrender. I can't fight anymore. And I got to tell you, from that moment on, increase began to happen, an opportunity began to happen, and I fought as hard as I could fight, and I realized that God just kept his gentle thumb on my chest and let me throw my tantrum. And then when I said I peed a little, and I just said I surrender, he took his thumb off my chest and went, good, let's get started in rebuilding. Yeah, the life I've created.
That's why at the end of every one of PC's sermons, he pees just a little bit up on the stage. It's beautiful. I didn't know that's what it was.
I wear depend diapers on stage.
No, that's a great story.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
I know, I appreciate that. I like
That's a herd thinning story. When I tell that,
Oh, yeah.
I'm certain at least one person will leave the church.
I'm already thinking of, will the title of this episode be I Peed a Little by Pastor Chris Jung? Right? That could be it.
You should.
So there, and I wanted to maybe touch on something too, and now I feel like, okay, I will probably just forget the bonus episode. We're gonna kind of let people hear the message, because there's so much good stuff we talked about there with anxiety and depression and that. But I'm so grateful that we spent the time talking about the reason why you put together this mental health series of a lot of talk about suicide. And but you said something earlier that I always appreciate. It's the concept of we all have these thoughts. You know, we have bad thoughts, we have irrational thoughts, we have irreverent thoughts. You know, I always think about, when I think about church and that sort of thing, I don't remember the comedian who it was, but would talk about, you know, even going up in front of a casket and all of a sudden they just start chuckling, you know? But I mean, you just have thoughts come to your head at the craziest of times. Yeah. And so I love talking about this thing called, it's inappropriate thought syndrome. And I gave the example, and I'm curious if you have one of these as well, but I gave the example at your church of, if you get me about 5 stories up or higher, I will look over a balcony, and we used to stay at Embassy Suites all the time because we were cheap and we could fit all 4 kids into the room, and some free breakfast and all that. And if I would just look over the balcony, I would immediately think, oh, I could totally jump right now. And just that jelly legs, and my heart rate would raise. Yeah. Now, you know, it's just a thought. I never did. Right. And so everybody has inappropriate, crazy, irrational thoughts. That's the first tenet of inappropriate thought syndrome. The second one is, just because you have them doesn't mean that's what you're going to do. Right. Or that's who you are. Because, I mean, I've heard everything. You know, people sitting there saying, I'm at dinner, I've got a steak knife, you know, my wife's next to me, and I think, man, one pop right here, you know? Yeah. And they're like, am I bad? Yeah. And, you know, and it's like, I think, you know, it's the thought. Well, it's funny because I love like Dateline mysteries and these kind of macabre, dark. I don't know why I'm attracted to those. I love sort of all that. Tell me more. Lay down, Chris. Tell me more about this. And Lisa always says, my wife always says, why do you like these? And I kind of have this running joke that I say, I'm trying to figure out how to get away with it. Okay. And it of course, it implies that I'm going to do it. I say, mark the time code on this, where it's, okay, this will be used as evidence. Yeah. Hopefully this doesn't show up in a court case later on. But that's sort of my, inappropriate thought. Yeah, and I'll say it out loud. I'll go, if that guy had just not told anyone, he could have got. And Lisa's always like, "Why are you siding with the guy? Right. Why are you trying to sleep downstairs? Why are you trying to help him figure out how to get away with the crime?" It's because you have a very caring heart. So then the last part of inappropriate thought syndrome is, so you've got everybody has them. Just because you have them doesn't mean that you're going to do it. But I love the third one is, and thought suppression does not work. Right. Right. And we talked about that in the congregation, that if we say to everybody right now, whatever you do, that you're listening to this podcast, do not think of a furry white polar bear with a red hat on when we make it better. Don't do it. Whatever you do, don't do it. Right. And so what I love about that is that's what we do, though. We think, man, I shouldn't be thinking that. And then I always say that then your brain holds up a little sign and it says, what, this? You know, think about this thing? Yep. And so if it is hey, how could I get away with murder? Right. You know, the only way to really work with that is check that out. I'm thinking about how to get away with murder, not I shouldn't be thinking this, because then you're just going to continue to think it. Or the person that struggles with lust and somebody walks past them and they think, don't think a lustful thought, don't think a lustful thought. And then of course their mind goes, oh, you mean like picturing them like this? Exactly, yeah. It's as if your mind does the exact opposite once. Yeah, that's funny. That's a topic I haven't even taken on, but the like objectifying and that sort of thing. And that is the best way around something like that is noted, don't beat myself up and just kind of gently move away from that thought or that, So, all right, we've probably gone an hour. We've gone an hour, PC. Oh my gosh. Isn't that crazy? So I'm going to now play some very happy music, and it's going to just transition right into our sermon, your sermon, your message. And again, I'm so grateful you're here. I want to come back and do an ADD episode, right? Okay,
I'd
that'd be
love to.
fun.
Yeah.
And
If I can give you my attention that long, I'll do it.
I don't know, right? But and I'm grateful that people haven't heard the episodes we did before, and this is the thing where I don't ever know what the episode numbers are, but I would please just go back and look. We did one on marriage and we did one on parenting.
Yeah.
And going back into that,
Really good.
I love the fact that you will tackle those subjects from the pulpit, and I've heard more positive feedback from those episodes than almost any on those two topics. And I just have to tell you what I love about it, and I told you this before, so I want it's on the microphone,
Yeah.
so that after they hear that now, oh, he was thinking about committing murder, then this will be the part for your character witness, okay? That
Yeah.
I mean, so many people have said to me though, man, I totally want that to be my best friend, or I would love to be in his congregation, or because I love that you do give that message of hope and positivity, and so I'm grateful for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thanks for having me here.
Oh yeah. So all right, until our next episode, which will be on ADD. Thank you for coming on the virtual couch.
Thanks for having
Thanks,
me.
PC.
All right. Appreciate
All right.
you.
This